Thompson Lake has teemed with life ever since the sun first shone on its waters some 15,000 years ago. The water and surrounding land provide an environment in which a wide diversity of life can thrive. It's called a backwater lake because it sits along the Illinois River, at one time rising and falling as the river level ebbs and flows. Broad but shallow, the lake is a refuge for an abundance of plants and animals. This ecosystem is a source of food both above and below the water's surface. Fluctuating water levels enable a wet prairie to grow alongside the lake, where plants like Missouri ironweed and mountain mint can flourish. A field of yellow lies farther inland where cup plants and white wild indigo make up only a fraction of a tall grass prairie. The prairie is home to fauna and flora that is expanding the woodland along the bluff. A pair of swans majestically watch over the wetland, as bald eagles gently soar above, keeping an eye on it all. It is called Emiquon. It's a minor but important part of the Illinois River Valley that traces its origin to a much colder glaciation period that reached its peak 18,000 years ago.
As the ice age comes on, you get the southward migration of these enormous sheets of ice, which cover up much of Illinois. They move forward and retreat. And it's an event at the end of that would profoundly changed the character of the Illinois River, an event we call the Kankakee Torrent.
13,500 BC, glacial dam at Marseilles broke, sent a wall of water down this valley, 140 feet deep, 26 miles wide to San Jose, and in its wake, across the present Illinois River, left all of that wonderful sand country for us to grow melons and cucumbers and squash today. Over here, it deposited a heavier fraction, larger boulders, and gravel and clay. And that's where all of the gravel pits are located today.
The backwaters were a breeding ground for a variety of life, producing a biomass of wild product that attracted ducks, elk, and deer, and that attracted humans, who first set foot on this land about 11,000 years ago.
The river valleys themselves have enormous attractive power because of the diversity of life that expresses itself both geographically and seasonally. So the fall comes on, you've got these big oak hickory forests that are generating huge masses of nuts. We know from the record that people are consuming nuts in abundance.
Early on, they were probably mainly basic hunter-gatherers. By the end of the Archaic period, say 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, they began to do a little bit of plant hybridization. And by the time, say 800 AD or so here, gardening was very prevalent, and it offset some of the early hunting and gathering.
For unknown reasons, these groups disappeared from the area during the 15th century. With time, other Native Americans again called it home. But as Europeans moved in, they had a growing need for additional tillable soil. In the early 20th century, they turned to the broad expanses of floodplain, which were ideal for farming.
In order to protect those fields from the river, levees were constructed, keeping the water off of the floodplain. The backwater lakes are pumped dry, and now you have a biological factory of another sort, one that is involved in the production of plant foods rather than animal foods.
Behind the levees, Thompson Lake became a cultivated field for the next 80 years. Over time, the biological health of the Illinois River system was in distress. As a response, in 2000, several organizations, led by the Nature Conservancy, developed a framework by which Mother Nature herself could restore the dynamic ecosystem of its backwater and its adjoining prairies and bluffs. Despite nearly a century of growing row crops, and despite the impact of pumps draining the land, the Nature Conservancy knew Mother Nature was resilient enough to restore the natural ecology.
We shut the pumps off, and a lot of the water returned from precipitation and some groundwater effects. And if you get the hydrology restored and you get that right, then a lot of the plants will respond from the seed bank. Seeds that have lain dormant in the soil for the last 80 to 90 years while this area was being farmed responded to that restored hydrology.
The resilience of nature is extraordinary and not to be underestimated. All of us were astonished to see that plants, wetland plants, dormant for 8 decades, began to emerge. So huge stands of cattails and lotus all of a sudden appear where once it was row crop of corn.
Submerged species like coontail, floating leaf species like lotus and other things, those are mostly gone from the Illinois River because of a variety of reasons, including commercial navigation and control of the water levels for commercial navigation and some other things, sedimentation, a number of factors. And so the neat thing about Emiquon is it is disconnected from the river, and that's really let the aquatic vegetation's communities come back.
These plants are but a small part of the restored Thompson Lake. The transparency of the lake's water is critical, as measured with a Secchi disc.
If I can get light, into more of the lake, that has implications for more algae growing, more zooplankton growing, more fish feeding off that. These things are dependent then on the smallest of organisms, and that's the protozoans and the bacteria. And they're important for 2 reasons. They're the turning point in the cycle of life. And to some extent, they're taking nutrients and moving it up to the algae and the zooplankton and bringing food to them. But they're also taking the things that die and decomposing them, breaking them down. So, this is where, we go from death to life and complete the circle.
Skimming the surface of Thompson Lake reveals a healthy population of microscopic organisms.
So what you're seeing there is not crystal clear water like you would get out of your tap, but it's more of water that contains algae and some other, maybe suspended sediments, a lot of really small little critters that might look like dirt when you look at them just without a microscope. So it shows that there's a lot of food base there, a lot of organic food there available for the zooplankton to eat.
They have names like stentor, scud, and planaria, indicators of a healthy lake. To confirm the lake's health, scientists use a YSI probe to test pH, salinity, and oxygen levels. Dropping through the water to the bottom of the lake, a small mechanical clamshell takes a sample of the soft soil. Life abounds, like fingernail clams, a favorite food for ducks. A further search of the sediment shows the larval stage of a small fly known as a chironomid that floats to the surface when becoming an adult.
A lot of the invertebrates that we see might reside in the sediments for a while as an egg form. So these can revive. A lot of these things can last for hundreds of years in the soil. So that's kind of a basis for early restoration.
you can have a lot of different things growing and it might not be the best thing for a lake. What you have here is a nice balance of many different organisms at all different levels in the food chain.
These insects and the micro zooplankton, the micro crustaceans we looked at are really the basis of a lot of the food web to support the fish populations and also the ducks, the waterfowl that come through.
For a migratory bird, this is incredibly important stopover habitat for maybe 60 days in the fall for a mallard, or 20 days for a green-winged teal in the spring, or even as breeding habitat for the entire summer for a wood duck.
Of all the birds at Emiquon, the American coot may be the most populous. Up to 150,000 of them can be on the lake at one time. Dead trees provide a nesting ground for double-crested cormorants. They swim low in the water and prefer fish, diving for as long as 70 seconds to find their prey. One of the smallest birds at Emiquon is the sora rail, light enough to use an American lotus as a platform to seek nourishment. Of the larger birds at the lake, the great blue heron has a wingspan of 6 feet. It flies with its legs trailing behind its body. Pelicans have even larger spans, spreading their wings as wide as 12 feet. While they can fly at 25 miles per hour, great egrets usually slowly wade in the water when it's time to capture fish.
I think it's really surprised us just in the initial 7 or 8 years since the water was really just turned off, or the pumps were turned off, and water was allowed to naturally build up in the old wetland basins and the old Thompson Lake area. How kind of magical it has been. The plant communities that have come back, and then the birds that have responded.
The Nature Conservancy's Emiquon Preserve actually is part of the Emiquon Complex, which includes the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Chautauqua and Emiquon Wildlife Refuges. Together, they're a 14,000-acre mosaic of habitats: forest, prairies, wetlands, and open water.
National Wildlife Refuge is a place where the plants and animals are the first thing that we consider on the landscape, and then we consider other uses compatible to that. It's a large complex that works all together. Birds from Chautauqua will feed out there all day, and then they'll fly over here and they'll roost on the lake over here at Emiquon at night. Our primary purpose is for migratory bird management. It's the reason it was established, primarily for waterfowl and shorebirds.
Life has returned to the skies over Emiquon, developing a symbiotic relationship with life in the water. While much of life at Emiquon came back naturally, the Nature Conservancy assisted where needed, stocking 31 species of fish in Thompson Lake.
It's a very important part of the habitat. Historically, these areas provided important nursery habitat for fishes.
To help ascertain the lake's health, the Illinois Natural History Survey uses harmless electroshocking to estimate fish population. A Floyd tag, like on this bass, helps assess growth, migration patterns, and natural mortality. Several species are found in these waters, including the pumpkin seed fish, which is a shell cracker and eats small snails. Starhead top minnow, consuming insect larvae. Gizzard shads that eat zooplankton and in turn are eaten by larger fish and pelicans. Golden shiner, which is also a source of food for sport fish. Black crappie, one of the more numerous sport fish. The common carp, which actually is not native to the area. And the state fish of Illinois, the bluegill, another popular sport fish. These sport fish attract many anglers to Thompson Lake. After acquiring a permit, the lake is open to the public.
Not only is there some sustenance that comes out of it, you've got fish and waterfowl, etc. There's also recreational opportunities that occur when you create a backwater lake.
Backwater lakes develop an interdependent relationship with the surrounding prairies and forests. At the Emiquon complex, there are more than 130 species of plants in the tall grass and wet prairies. They provide needed habitat for grassland nesting birds, which have been declining in numbers in Illinois. The 450 acres of tallgrass prairie have plants that may be recognizable to the casual observer's eye, but may not be familiar to the ear, like the purple coneflower, big blue stem, and the yellow compass plant. A wet prairie, contrary to what its name suggests, isn't constantly in water, but instead thrives with periodic flooding.
If you create a static system where the water levels don't change, then the habitat is going to stagnate and you're going to end up with a community that's not as diverse and not as productive as if you can create a dynamic system.
In addition to birds, a wet prairie attracts a variety of other winged creatures, including the damselfly and 2 different dragonflies, the second of which is sitting on its favorite plant, the milkweed. There are many other plants within the 150 acres of wet prairie, like winged loosestrife and swamp milkweed.
If we can create hydrology that is more similar to what was here when those organisms were doing very well, we think those ecological processes, hydrology, nutrient cycling, dispersion of seeds, connectivity, we think by restoring those ecological processes that most of the plants and animals are going to do fine.
Nature uses other processes like floods, droughts, and even fire as a reset mechanism in prairies. This helps reduce woody invasive species and stimulate future growth. Humans can step in to help nature by starting a prescribed burn. However, nature must still cooperate with certain required levels of wind speed, direction, temperature, and humidity before starting the fire. Workers use a drip torch with a mixture of 2/3 diesel fuel and 1/3 gasoline to set the prairie ablaze. Burns are scheduled every 5 years.
If you have a prairie that never burns and you don't control trees, pretty soon it's going to become a forest in this part of the country. And so we use fire to maintain the prairie as a disturbance to maintain that prairie.
A prescribed burn in March yields a blooming prairie in summer. Woody plants may not have a place on prairies, but they serve a notable purpose in the bottomland hardwood forest at Emiquon. The Nature Conservancy planted trees like black walnut, pecan, and river birch to restore the landscape. They will shade out the current undergrowth and allow different underbrush to emerge and attract new birds. And the seeds of the trees provide a varied diet for ducks. Hickory, oak, and other trees line the upland bluffs that surround the prairies and backwater.
It's all remnant from many, many years ago. It was never thoroughly logged out, and so we have these stands of forest that are of high quality, and we try to keep those things available for the songbirds that come and breed there in the spring.
Nestled on the hillside is the repository of thousands of years of human interaction with the landscape, Dixon Mounds Museum. The bluffs provide a barrier between Emiquon and still existing farmland that must remain dry. While the floodplain remains wet, conservators don't want it to become a true lake. In order to maintain the correct hydrology, 2 large culverts placed in the levee control water levels within Emiquon. When open, they connect the backwater to the Illinois River.
There was a time when you could let Mother Nature do what she wanted to do because so much of the floodplain was open and available to the river during flood stage, or even would draw down during the other parts of the year. But now, with so much of the floodplain behind levees, if you let the river do what it was going to do naturally, the volume of water overwhelms the amount of floodplain space for it to be in, and it's not really natural anymore.
We're using features like the levee, water control capabilities to try to restore a more natural hydrology that is dynamic. It changes from season to season.
The gravity-driven culverts conduct the water in either direction in an environmentally safe manner. Scientists are experimenting with methods like using sound and screens to prevent invasive fish species from entering Emiquon Preserve. The ability to change backwater levels is important for cattails, which are adversely affected when the water remains too high for too long. Muskrats use cattails to build their lodges. With fewer cattails, there are fewer muskrats, regardless of the season. It's been a major transformation for what once was one of the largest agricultural operations in the state of Illinois. Water pumps stopped, tractors yielded, cattle stepped aside. As rainfall filled the basin, dormant seeds came to life, and the skies were full of flight. Mother Nature has reclaimed its home. Scientists are next as they determine the best methods to assist in nature's homecoming.
The lessons we learn here can be applied to other watersheds, can be ramped up on a large river scale, larger watershed scale. And so if we can learn a little bit here, we can apply that to much larger systems.
460 species of animals, 280 different birds, and 150 plant species have created a habitat, a place where the natural world and people can find common ground. Because of a partnership between government, private, and nonprofit organizations, the restoration of Emiquon continues to evolve, benefiting both humankind and nature.
10,000 years ago, people were using this and using these resources here and learning from them, and we're doing the same thing today.
These backwater areas like Emiquon were so important to supporting that large river ecosystem.
If we can figure out a recipe that works here, we can start to move it up and down the river a little bit, and the idea is that you can raise the quality in the entire valley, not just in an particular isolated wetland.
Mother Nature is very resilient, and we've seen that here at Emiquon and other restoration sites that we've worked in.
For a long time, I think humanity has seen themselves as sort of separate from nature and the ability to control nature. It doesn't take long to study the question to discover that that's not the case, that we are integrally part of nature and that we have a role there and a responsibility.